All right, welcome everybody. We are about to kick off the fourth in our series. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to join. So, as is my habit, I'd love to know where we're at in the globe today. So, if you would just say hi in the chat and where you're viewing from, and then we'll get kicking off in about 2 minutes. My Salem, Oregon pal, yay, hello. I was actually just down in Salem over the weekend again. So, hi Iris in New York, North Carolina. Hi Sarah. Brian in Sacramento, hello, good morning. Oh, wow, now it's moving fast. I got to try to keep up here. Chicago, Connecticut, Missouri, Alexandria, hello, Kentucky. It is hot in St. Louis. I saw that. Wow. The heat dome is looking a little painful in a place that's already hot. Tamara, hello. Manitoba, another Chicago, Panama, Chester, Virginia. All right. Angelica, it's hot in Florida too. Yolanda, I'm coming to Madison on September 29th to do an event at University of Wisconsin. So watch my socials and maybe we can get you over there if you're interested. Hey, Colleen in Pittsburgh. Hello. Elizabeth's going to Wisconsin tomorrow. All right. We'll come back on the 29th. All right. Well, let's kick off. I think we've got a good quorum. So today, by way of introduction, I think everybody now knows me, but if anyone is new, I'm Eric Wood. I'm the CEO, or sorry, excuse me, the Chief Strategy Officer at Tigerhall and the former CEO of Explain, where we spent about 20 years working with transformation offices and senior leaders developing change activation campaigns. That combined with my experience working on the company side of making change at places like Intuit, as well as in the strategy making side at Bain and Company, went into the content that formed the foundation of the Strategy Activation Playbook, which is the book that I wrote on a more human-centered approach to change. My goal today is to sort of build on some of that work in conversation with lots of you that are experiencing transformation right now and start to build out a body of work around the transformation office for the modern age. So how do we future-proof our transformation office capability? What we are going to be talking about today is how do we make that transformation capability sustainable over time, especially in the face of frequent change. For those of you that weren't here last week, the topic that we covered last week was a very practical kind of how-to guide of how do you stand up a change and transformation office. So speaking of the transformation office as a capability broadly, how do we actually go from zero to the place where we've got kind of the future-proof transformation office capability in our organization? I outlined 11 steps in that process. You can use this whether you're actually building your transformation office in your organization or whether you want to measure the maturity of what you've got today. I encourage folks to go back if you didn't see it and review this. And you can use these 11 steps really as a way to identify the gaps and opportunities that you may have in your current capability. So hopefully it'll be a useful guide for you. In terms of today, what I'd like to do today is focus on how do we keep the transformation office and its capabilities relevant, performing at a very high level, and deeply embedded as a core organizational capability. How do we do that also with the appropriate level of C-suite support that we need so that ultimately we can become the secret weapon for change in our organization? So to do that, we're going to cover really sort of three topics. The first one is we want to understand why it is that the transformation office must be a permanent enterprise capability. So we're going to talk about some of the key arguments for that so that you can continue to build your business case for your organization and why you need to actually invest here. Secondly, I want to talk about some best practices for sustaining a high-performing transformation office. So sustainment is a really a key element. We've seen a lot of sort of up and down in terms of our change resources, oftentimes, sort of flowing with the big enterprise change followed by nothing going on. And so we see these offices and capabilities expand and contract pretty consistently. We want to make the case that this needs to be a constant, always on kind of capability. So how do we sustain that? And then lastly, we'll talk about some of the common risks that I've seen in working with transformation offices and some of the actionable strategies that you can utilize to mitigate those risks. So very practical today. I want to kick us off, as I always do, with a poll to just get a level set on where people are in the organization. I recognize from last conversations we've had that some of you are in a transformation office, some of you don't have a transformation office, some of you are in the process of building one. What I'd like you to do is answer this question from the lens of, in your organization, if you had this capability, where do you think the biggest challenges might be? So, specifically, what is the biggest threat to sustaining a high-performing transformation office in your organization? Again, if you don't have one, imagine what it would most likely be. And we'll give folks a couple minutes to fill this in. We're at about the halfway mark right now. Pretty good distribution. All right, just a few more seconds here till we get to our 80% plus mark.
All right, I think I'm gonna launch it up. What do you think?
Yep, let's do it. All right. So this is really interesting. I am kind of surprised that change fatigue is actually one of the lower risks. We talk about change fatigue being one of the biggest issues in the organization, but this audience is largely aligned with me that the lack of ongoing C-suite sponsorship and funding is actually one of the key risks. We've got about 36% of folks saying, yep, that's the big one. Also, a big quorum around the topic of being viewed as a temporary or flavor of the month. This is a big risk I'm going to talk about today, that we need to make sure we are rebranding our organizations to avert this particular risk. Getting stuck in execution only mode follows with 19%, and then resistance or lack of buy-in from business units at 9. So, uh, if folks are surprised at any of these, toss it into the chat. I'm curious, but I think this is pretty reflective of kind of what I've seen across most organizations, and I think it's probably a good launching off point for us to figure out how do we avert some of these concerns. So, with that, let's dive in. So, the point of view that I want to start us with today is this. The transformation office is not a project. It can't be that flavor of the month that we're talking about. It has to be a capability. So we need to start rebranding it, rethinking of it as a core capability within the enterprise. Oftentimes, we see in organizations that transformation offices are launched at a point of need. We've got a major enterprise change that's happening. Let's stand up a team to actually execute and drive this. And then, as soon as that episodic thing ends, so does the mandate for the transformation office, or resources are clawed back and it becomes weakened in some manner. So we lose that momentum in that kind of a cycle. In today's environment, second point, we are in a constant change space. Change is not a one-off event anymore. It's constant and it's only increasing. So, in a world where change and disruption are the norm, the transformation office's role is much more important, and we have to cultivate that sort of capability on an ongoing basis to stay competitive. And the most successful organizations ultimately treat their transformation office as a core enterprise function. So when we see it working successfully, we see it being a core enterprise function that is got a seat at the C-suite table, is involved in strategy planning, and is in the position to be a guiding force for actually activating change throughout the organization. Ultimately, it also serves the role of being that connective tissue between strategy and execution, a bridge, if you will, that actually connects the strategies to the realization of strategy. Without it, I will argue, and I will continue to argue to my dying day, that strategies are going to die in the vine. So we need to be able to link that bridge together. I just did it visually. So what I'd like to do is have this conversation with us about why it needs to be a permanent capability so that you've got a couple strong arguments that you can utilize to build your business case for this. The first key reason that I often cite is that continuous disruption is going to demand ongoing transformation. So it's an always on world. And I think people aren't yet getting this, especially in executive offices. They still see it as a function that is maybe in different silos. We've got change folks that for this. We've got learning and development for that. We've got a project office over here that does the project management. That continuous disruption only means that all that stuff needs to work faster and better together. So ultimately, it demands having an ongoing capability. Secondly, we need to bridge strategy and execution. All the data tells us that most strategies fail, right? When we're launching strategies, depending on who you're reading, who you're talking to, 60, 70, or 80% of them are not successful in terms of actually getting realized. And oftentimes that is because we haven't built that connective tissue mindfully. We haven't actually sat down in the strategy office and said, how do we take this strategy and bring it to life through people? And how do we, throughout that process, guide it so we're constantly bringing people up to the new behaviors that we need to achieve the outcomes that we want? And then third, institutionalizing change has got to be a core competency. So we need to institutionalize change, not just at the level of capability of the transformation office, but also in the culture of the organization. So we need to institutionalize the mechanics and the structures and the frameworks of how we do these things, whether it's our change methodology, whether it's our governance system, whether it's our metrics and measurements, but also we need to institutionalize change within the culture so that we can have a more resilient workforce that is accustomed to change and making it part of their daily rhythms. So this is the foundation upon which we want to start to explore then if we get this business case one, and if we're starting to build this capability, how do we make it sustainable? So I'm going to address sort of three themes around sustainability today. The first one is that we have to be building adaptability into our transformation office processes. So we need to be able to change as fast or faster than the change that's happening outside, because we're going to be the ones leading that change internally. So the most resilient offices are going to embrace some sort of an adaptive governance model. We're going to have the structures and processes to enable rapid reprioritization of the changes, identify what we need to invest in, what we need to pivot from, what we need to maybe cease doing, so that we're constantly evolving and identifying the changes that are to be prioritized today in real time. Some of the key priorities around how we do that are these. One, we want to have at least quarterly portfolio reviews to reevaluate those initiative priorities. So those of us that are doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year planning cycles, we need to start beating the drum to say we need to accelerate this and look at this much more frequently, at least quarterly, looking at what's on our plate, what have we accomplished, where are we going next, and then do that start, stop, continue exercise to say, what is not relevant now? What can we stop doing? What has popped up in the last quarter that's new, that's changing? We've just, for example, getting tariff announcements every week, right? For a lot of your businesses, this might be actually impacting your planning significantly in weekly cycles. What's new that we need to start? And then what are the things that we were doing that we want to continue investing in? But doing that portfolio analysis on at least a quarterly rhythm will help us make sure that the organization is aligned to the actions that we should be taking versus the ones that we committed to 2 years ago that maybe aren't relevant today. Secondly, we want to build agile governance models and to replace those rigid stage gate processes. So for the same reason, we need to work more quickly. We had, in some cases, these old processes or these old rhythms that existed that were probably elongated. And we need to actually change our governance model to take a page from the book of Agile to say, you know what, instead of the waterfall strategy process or the milestones and markers that we planned out in our road mapping session last year, we need to be able to just sort of stand up and do that start, stop, continue exercise on an almost daily basis. So look at your governance model and understand how can you make it more agile so that that governance organization can really be looking at the dashboards and understanding, do we need to course correct or not, and know when you have to do it. And then to that end, the third point, we have to have real-time listening mechanisms that inform those adjustments. So if we're still relying on quarterly pulse checks, we're still relying on KPIs without looking at the KCIs, the key change indicators that are leading to those things, we're blind. So we don't have the data or the insights to be able to do those two prior items. So we need to look inside of our organization to understand how do we get real-time data, real-time metrics to understand and map both the leading and lagging indicators that are telling us where we're at in the adoption of the change we're trying to make. Getting that through technology, getting that through other systems and processes has got to be a key priority to sustaining the office because it's the data that's telling you how to steer the ship. And if it's not real time, you're not seeing stuff today. You're seeing what happened in the rearview mirror. Second best practice that I'd like to highlight, talent development and succession planning. So we talked a little bit about culture earlier, and this is where it's going to pop up again. I assert that the transformation office is responsible for thinking about talent development and succession planning in the organization as it relates to its transformation capabilities. You want to become an incubator of that culture. You want to incubate that change capacity inside the organization, that change mindset inside that organization, and you want to lead that process. And you also want to do it for yourself. So this is a case where, we've got to do it for ourselves first and put on our own mask before we're going out and helping others to do it. So four things to be thinking about to bring this to life. First, can we organize cross-functional rotations for our high potential leaders? So one way that we can really start to spread this in the organization is by flipping learners to teachers, as I like to say, bringing leaders in from different business units, business groups, and maybe doing a one year rotation, let's say, in the transformation office. An opportunity to do this is whenever we have an enterprise-wide transformation, who are the business leaders that are actually most responsible for that? Can we actually tap them and say, hey, we're going to take them in for an assignment for 1 year to help us actually lead this transformation that's going to actually make a big impact in their particular BU or in their sphere of influence, but make them part of the team. Those cross-functional rotations are going to do a bunch of things. One, you're going to be more likely to be connected very quickly to that enterprise change that needs to be made. Two, you're actually going to help cross-train that person in the transformation office's capabilities so that they can then go out and be an ambassador when they return in their rotation within their organization. So you're creating not only change champions, but you're creating sort of super zealots. They're going to go out there with that change toolkit and spread it. Likewise, number two, mentorship programs for next generation transformation leaders. So here I'm thinking about middle management particularly. You don't necessarily have to bring them in for a full rotation, but the transformation office can sponsor the learning and development for middle managers in our change methodology and our ways of working. So we know that the middle management layer is often that most critical link in any change activation program. So how can we actually equip them actively with learning and development programs, for example, or mentorship programs, for example, that are going to actually expose them to these tools and likewise get them to be in a position where they can train others. Third, within our own organization, we should be talking about succession planning for our critical roles. This is, I think of this in terms of potentially cross-training. So imagine that you've got somebody on the communications team who is also learning the role of learning and development. Those two are going to collaborate no matter what. So the more folks that we have that are actually learning each other's roles and responsibilities, we're going to have both the ability to hot swap them if we need to, but we're also going to have better co-creation and collaboration as they're executing their own roles. So wherever we can in our office, let's see if we can find ways to cross-train people, and in the process of doing that, make us more effective and have succession plan in place so that we know if this person leaves, who the next person to move in that seat is going to be. And then lastly, it seems kind of obvious, but let me unpack this. The right people for the transformation office is an art form. I've been talking to a couple different transformation leaders about, what do you look for in the right people? And for example, the theme that I continue to hear is we need really two things to be the right people for this office. We, of course, need people that get stuff done, right? We need people who are excellent at execution, but they also have to be excellent at relationship building because this is an office that is connective tissue. We have to be constantly working with our partners across the business. And you can be a driver who gets something done, but if you drive over people while you're doing it, you only get one shot. What we need to do if we're going to have a sustainable capability is have people who are excellent at driving to the conclusion, but doing it in partnership and co-creation with a strong relationship with our partners across the organization. So we need executors who are also the right kind of relationship builders. This feels to me like an entire new webinar at some point. We'll talk about that, or at least have a panelist come talk about that. And then third, For sustainability, I want you to be thinking about how do you create repeatable playbooks for change? I say playbooks as kind of a container or a placeholder, but what I'm really talking about here are what are your methods and your methodology and your toolkits and your frameworks that you are going to standardize within your transformation office. The repeatability of using those tools will build resilience, but it'll also build kind of a lingua franca in the organization that'll help you get ramped up faster and make you more effective. So, some key practices to be thinking about here: build playbooks for common scenarios. What I mean by this is if you're a company that does a lot of mergers and acquisitions, somebody in the organization knows what our best practices are when we do a merger integration. Write it down. Let's create a playbook. Now we know that they're going to be variable. Everyone's going to have a different circumstance. But if there's like 5 to 10 plays that we always do pretty consistently, let's document that so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And we can actually start to capture some of those best practices for that particular scenario. You've probably got a number of different scenarios that you stand up change, right? So there's probably a playbook for mergers and acquisitions. There's a playbook for standing up a new technology. There's a playbook for culture change. But you as an organization should write that book because then you can not only standardize it, but you can build upon it and you've got a receptacle to hold those best practices as new ones get developed. Secondly, frameworks and processes for strategy activation. So, what is your methodology of activating strategy? Whether you're using the methodology from my book, the Strategy Activation Playbook, whether you're using ProSci, whether you're using something else, standardize around a common approach to how you activate the people in the organization to achieve the visions that you have for the organization. That process should be documented and should be commonly understood. Third, um, have a toolkit of engaging exercises for alignment and buy-in. So when I was at Explain, my partner Dave Gray wrote a book called Game Storming. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. But the idea was, there's a bunch of things that we do as facilitators that are actually ways to invigorate people, get people excited, get people in a co-creative space to create new change and innovation. Well, for your organization, document those exercises. If you've got somebody on your team who's just got a great exercise that's going to really work to really light up a room and change a meeting's flow, document that and teach others. So start to create your own game storming book. What are the key exercises that we're going to lean into? An example of this that I hear quite often is hackathons. So as I've been talking to change leaders over the last couple of weeks, and I ask the question, what are the things that you rely on quite often in your office? I'm hearing that hackathons are one of the examples of a thing that people find a lot of value in because they're bringing in people from different roles to discuss a common problem. And they, from that experience, get a co-created solution that probably looks different or better than if any one of those silos had done that exercise. So just one example for you. Third, have a best practice, or fourth rather, have a best practice repository for continuous improvement. And what I mean by this is you need to actually capture this in a place. You need to build a library. Now, whether that's in a SharePoint site, whether that's on an intranet, whether that's in something more social based, doesn't matter. Whatever is whatever your organization is using today, start there and then improve upon it. But have a place to gather these best practices, these documents, these frameworks, these exercises, so that they can be easily disseminated out. And then lastly, and related to that, don't let that library just sit there stagnant as a place that people go into when they need something. You need to actively scale those best practices. So in addition to gathering that content, we want you to be publishers and we want you to be advocates and we want you to be teachers and go out in the organization and say, hey, can I sit down with the leaders on this team and train them up in this exercise? I think it's going to really add value as we go forward with this initiative. Build some both formal and informal ways to actively scale those best practices in the organization. One company that I worked with, Mathematica, did something really cool organically, which is they were doing a customer centricity initiative where they were trying to get leaders in their organization to change some of their behaviors in customer meetings. And they deployed a toolkit of exercises that you might be able to use in a meeting. But then they asked folks, hey, if you've used that actively and successfully, just take your iPhone and film a 2 minute, hey, I went into this meeting, I used this thing, it was awesome, here's what happened, little video clips. And they started transmitting them around the organization and it went viral. All of a sudden, the people that weren't on board started doing the exercises because they also wanted to be recognized for actually sharing those best practices, and the best practices spread naturally. So think about the kinds of things in your organization, whether formally or informally, that you can do to actively scale best practices and celebrate successes and wins. Those things will help build momentum in the organization. So a last point of view that I want to share, building on the sustainability question, is also the sponsorship question. So my point here is this: if the transformation office isn't part of the C-suite, then it had better at least have VIP access. It's critical that we have senior leadership sponsorship to make sure that we not only survive, but grow and have the resources we need to continue to evolve. So if you don't have that level today, then this is probably your number one task, is to go out and build the case for having executive sponsorship at the C-suite level. Secondly, we know that to be successful, we also need to position our approach to the C-suite in a proactive way to position ourselves to have a seat at the table as strategic partners, not tactical implementers. So in addition to having that sponsorship, we also need to move up in the continuum of where strategy making happens so that we've got the visibility to understand what's coming so that we can position ourselves to be part of the solution and a strategic enabler for success from the very start. So not only do we need to move up in the organization, but we need to move earlier in the process to be successful. So some recommendations towards that end. Number one, make sure that we build the capability to have regular impact reporting that's aligned to the enterprise's KPIs. So in an earlier webinar, I talked about the idea that KPIs only show up after the change has been activated over the course of many quarters, right? It might not actually see that new net promoter score result from that customer centricity initiative for a full year, but it doesn't mean we're not doing stuff. So what we want to be able to do is actually track those key change indicators that are the leading indicators that are going to predict when we're going to achieve those KPIs and the performance and the outcomes that we're seeking, and actually have reporting available for that so that we can constantly tell that story and show that data to continue to build that sustainability and that sponsorship. Secondly, we want to make sure that you're highlighting those success stories and testimonials. So in addition to the hard data that you've got on the dashboard, you want to be actually doing the storytelling and celebrating those successes, like that example in Mathematica, where part of the process was telling the stories of what was successful and using that as inspiration to get others on board. This is also a key part of something I'm leading to, which is starting to build the brand for the transformation office. So if we're telling those quantitative data points and those qualitative stories, we're creating a whole picture of our impact. Third, we want you to formalize the transformation office's role in strategic planning cycles. So again, we need to move upstream. So we need to make sure that we're not just receiving the charters to say, go make the change, but we're actually in the planning process itself. We're understanding what the strategic rhythms are. We're understanding where the strategies are coming from. We're working with our external strategy partners, if we're using those, or our internal strategy team, and we are a part of the process. That way we can position ourselves to be a strategic enabler of the process and ultimately be ROI insurance for the outcomes. And then the last point, and I kind of tipped into this a little bit earlier, is you also need to be active marketers. So as a transformation office, we need to make sure that we are building our brand as actively as our company is building our brand with consumers. The employees and the leaders of our organization are consumers of our outcomes. And the brand isn't what you say it is, the brand is what they say you are. So we need to use these testimonials, we need to use these success stories, we need to be out and be seen in the organization as actively making change. And then don't be humble about it. Celebrate your wins, celebrate your successes, because that's only going to build momentum. And momentum leads to the support that you need from the C-suite. It leads to the resources that you need to do the next one even better. And it leads to sustainability ultimately. So think of yourself and your function as a brand that you need to build. I promised that we would talk a little bit about some of the risks. So some of the risks that I've seen over the years that will just torpedo the success of the office are summarized in these six. The first one, we talked about it, and it came up in the poll, right? Becoming a flavor of the month. Oftentimes, we're standing up a transformation effort around a particular initiative, but when that initiative dies, so does that capability. What we need to do is build that C-suite sponsorship to understand that change is constant, that we need this as a capability to be successful, and that we have to be embedded in those planning cycles from the start. That will help us ensure that those folks understand that we always need this capability at the ready. Number two, we do sometimes get stuck in execution only mode. So if we've got a portfolio of things going on, this is sometimes heads down. We just got to execute, execute, execute. But again, we need to make sure that while we're executing, we always have a seat at the strategic planning table because we need to understand what's coming next and be prepared for it. We need to build our business cases for the resources we need for the next thing, even while we're executing the thing today. The third risk, resistance from business units. So, especially in organizations that are highly decentralized, it's sometimes difficult to navigate the matrix. It's sometimes difficult to get into one organization and say what worked here might work over there. So what we need to do is we need to actually start to build those strong relationships. Again, we go back to the people in our office. They can't just be executors. They've also got to be relationship builders. And then we want to invite them to help us co-create the solution. Co-creation is a really powerful antidote to that other problem because I've been in those business units. Sometimes, what corporate wants to do isn't relevant here. On the ground, things work differently here, and you need to understand that. Well, we can actually bridge that because if we can bring the transformation office capabilities and a strong relationship to that business leader, but invite them to co-create the tailoring of how this is going to show up in your business unit, not only are we now building that connective tissue from our core enterprise goals and the local realities, but we're also investing that person in ownership of the outcome, right? So people support that which they co-create. So if we can get those business leaders engaged in co-creation, then those folks they're more likely to say, yeah, this came from us versus this was thrown over the wall at us. Change fatigue. Obviously, this is a reality in the world. What we can do as a transformation office is make sure that we are actively monitoring sentiment and we're adjusting the pacing of our initiatives with an eye towards the entire portfolio. Oftentimes, that fatigue happens simply because lots of efforts are stacking up, but they're ignorant of the other ones that are happening. So, this particular group of project managers in Australia is getting overwhelmed because they happen to be at the intersection of 5 different transformations, and there's just too much. As a transformation office, we can start to be portfolio managers and understand what's happening when, where, to whom, and then start to balance that and make sure that we're actively looking at that heat map and measuring and monitoring what we're rolling out to people when. And also importantly, the more we tailor our activation programs, the less noise there is because we maybe don't have to tailor 100% of the organization. Maybe we only need to work on this initiative with this 10 or 20%. So that'll also help them with that change fatigue, but it requires us being air traffic controllers for all the transformation happening in the company. And then lastly, around insufficient resourcing, we know, and I hear every single day, we are just so strapped for resources. We're being asked to do 100 things with half as many people. So what we need to do here is secure multi-year commitments for resources while we're demonstrating value. So we can look for ways to give us more scalability through technologies. We can bring in automation. We can use AI. We can use software tools, things that are going to give our organization scalability, but demonstrating the business case of that impact and making the case that this isn't episodic anymore. Change is constant will help us to build those secure multi-year commitments that are going to allow us to say, I've got the resources, not for what I need to do today, but I have the resources for where we're going next. So this is another reason why we want to string together that bigger picture and get earlier to the table, because we're not asking for the resources we need now, we're asking for the resources we need tomorrow. And then I skipped one, I realize, which is leadership turnover. So I will address this as well, because the other thing I've seen quite often is one leader sponsor says, hey, I want this transformation office stood up. It rises with the leader. And then if that leader leaves, it falls. So one way to mitigate that risk is to be focused on getting that C-level sponsorship, but spreading those relationships out building relationships across the organization, and aligning our activities not with the needs of a single sponsor, but aligning our mission to the core business goals. That way, new leader comes in, we're a core resource because we're actually aligned with the most important goals of the organization, and we're part of the plan of how we're going to bring it to life. So we create an organizational dependency on our capabilities that can rise beyond any single leader that might be a sponsor for us. So with that, I'm going to leave us with 6 plays that kind of summarize some of this stuff. I am putting together at the end of this series an actual playbook that we'll send out to all the attendees. So it'll summarize some of the key takeaways from each of these sessions. But I'm going to give you an advanced look at the 6 plays related to sustainability. So number 1, build adaptive processes with real-time feedback. So we need to make sure we're getting the data in real time so that we can constantly adapt, shift, course correct what we're doing. Like driving a car to a destination, stuff pops up. You might have to take a detour. But if you actually have the data to know where to go, when to pivot, how to pivot, and what capabilities we've got, you can course correct yourself much more effectively if you've got those adaptive processes combined with real-time feedback. Number 2, we want to recruit and develop high EQ cross-functional change leaders. So ultimately, what we're looking for here is the right talent that blends strategic insight with emotional intelligence and people that can foster collaboration and trust. We need to be relationship builders while we're executing change. Ultimately, this is going to lead us to better long-term, more sustainable results. Number 3, establish comprehensive change activation methodologies in your organization. So we talked about this a little before, but pick a practice and standardize around it. Even if the practice is the most sort of mundane, simple, well understood one, it's a lot better than if you've got 3 or 4 people over here doing one practice, 4 or 5 people over there doing another practice, and yet another group over here. So a standardized practice is going to win over having multiple approaches to change and change activation in your organization. Try to standardize around the one that's appropriate for your business context. Number 4, institutionalize best practices and lessons learned. So we want to build that library. We want to systemically capture those insights, those ways of working, those things that are working in the organization, and then magnify them. So think about not only how to capture them, but how to scale them out. Number 5, embed the transformation office into those enterprise cycles. You need to be at the table as the strategy is being created, not only so you can shape it and make it better, but that you can actually build the strategic argument for the resources you need to actually bring it to life. So be embedded at that table, and if you're not at that table, make sure you get there. And then lastly, consistently prove your value through data and stories. This is back to the branding argument, but you want to consistently be proving the value and the impact you're making by sharing your best practices, by sharing your successes, by demonstrating ROI, and by doing that, building a brand that you are truly the secret weapon to bring strategy to life in the organization. That brand is ultimately your most ultimate level of sustainability. So that's something that you're going to have to build over time. But I see a lot of organizations just running fast and doing and not thinking actively about brand as a sustainable element of your strategy. So the core takeaway for today is this: when it comes to when it becomes a core enterprise, the transformation office will become a permanent capability for driving continuous reinvention in a time of wild disruption. We need this to be an enterprise function in the organization that is actually responsible for adapting to change and helping the organization to navigate that change at the same pace or faster than the change is occurring. Some closing thoughts for us today, and we've got some time for questions after this. You can ask yourself these 4 questions if you want to just summarize some of this to just start to get a sense of where are we at today or where should we be tomorrow. How have we made our transformation office adaptive? Are we rigid right now in our ways of working, or do we have a really agile set of processes to react? Are we doing more frequent start, stop, continue exercises to say, what's the stuff that we're doing that's no longer relevant? What's new that we should be addressing? And what are we going to shift? Number 2, what is our process to ensure that we're investing in people and culture? Again, I want to emphasize that a culture of agility is equally important to the capability of transformation. Putting them together is what equals capacity. So we need to make sure that our transformation office has a plan to how we're going to invest in people and culture, not only for our office, but for the entire company. We need to be the sponsors of that change agility. Number three, how can we prove the value in real time? Can we today? Are we able to demonstrate those KCIs and show how they link to the KPIs? If not, let's figure out how to do that because that's going to be critical to telling the stories that are going to win the resources and the success that we need, as well as allowing us to guide and course correct as we're executing. And then lastly, how are we embedded in both strategy creation and strategy execution? We want to look at that entire continuum and understand where are all the places that we can continue to move upstream until we're at the point where we're a strategic partner to the organization. And not only crafting the execution plans, but actually helping to shape the strategies and building our capabilities into it. So what's next? Two things. I would love to have you to challenge you to audit your organization to ensure that it's adaptive, that it's investing in people, that it's proving the value and embedded in strategy. And if you find that you've got gaps or opportunities there, now you know what you're doing for the next couple months. Also, I'd like to invite you to join us next week. We're going to be having a really interesting conversation with three senior leaders that have been there and done that. We're going to invite them in to talk about their experience and their lessons learned in building and leading a transformation office. And I'm going to leave a good amount of time to have the audience available to make questions to this panel. So we'll probably spend 20 to 30 minutes or so in a structured conversation. And then I want to open the floor so that each of you can address your questions with folks that have been there. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be very rich. So please join us for that. We'll drop a link into the chat to join us for the webinar if you aren't already signed up for it. We'd love to see you there. Also, of course, if you'd like to see a demo of how Tigerhall is addressing building the technologies and the capabilities to support the transformation office, we'd love to show you that. So please reach out to me or anyone in the link in the chat to do that. And then lastly, as always, a lot of this content's coming from you. I am having conversations with people almost every day around these topics. So if you'd like to share your insights, your experiences, if you'd like to discuss questions, or if you've got a change challenge you'd like to just thought partner with, please reach out to me personally. I would be thrilled to have that conversation. You can catch me at eric@tigerhall.com by email or hit me on LinkedIn. With that, why don't we see if we've got some questions we want to address? Julie, were there any themes that we should be diving into?
Yeah, so here's the first one. It's a question from Ellen. So, based on the transformation office being the connective tissue between strategic planning and execution, does that end up sitting outside of these two functions or in one of them? What would be a best practice in being that connective tissue?
I think the best practice is to actually build it as a function that's on its own, right? So building a transformation office that actually reports into the C-suite is critical because if you do have a strategy office, you need to be collaborating with them very, very closely. In some cases, if you do have a strategy office, you might build the transformation office and the strategy office side by side. But in most cases, what I've seen is that it ends up being connective tissue by virtue of relationships. So it's very likely in most organizations that there's a central transformation office that partners with the communications office, the learning and development team, the program managers, the strategy office, and the C-suite. And basically, the relationships do form the function. So I guess I'm not sure if I'm giving you a great answer here, but the short answer is it's completely a function of how you're already organized today because you're likely going to have to evolve that into what will eventually become a strong central transformation office with a number of those capabilities on the inside. It's usually an evolution.
Thank you for that. So we have J. Elise Edwards who has their hand raised. So let's see if it's a question or if it's an accidental hand raise. Here, I'll let Elise the opportunity to speak. Elise?
Might have been an accidental hand raise.
Oh,
No
well,
worries.
we can't hear you, but here,
Oh
if
yeah,
you want to, oh, accident, no
accident.
problem. Sounds good. All right. So yes, so next question. Um, I know that we have use cases and we do have pages on how this works at Tigerhall. I don't know if you want to dive into a use case or some thoughts around this, or maybe just keep it general. But we have a question from Tamara, and it's essentially, does Tiger Hall have any published evidence, white papers, etc., of actual use cases to which this model has been applied, and was it a positive outcome? So I've already shared our use cases page, but if you want to, as you want to dive into that question, then.
Yeah, all I'll say is simply this. What we're trying to do at Tiger Hall is actually build the software suite for the transformation office, right? So, everybody's got a automation solution by function, and the transformation office has never had that. We don't, we need our own CRM system in effect to be able to run transformation. So what we're trying to do with Tiger Hall is this. We're trying to basically create a platform that is allowing the transformation office to plan, execute change and learning programs while measuring and managing those outcomes and doing it with engaging content and AI supported generated content that's giving you more resources and more impact, and then allowing us to see in the back end what's happening in the organization. So what's the sentiment that's occurring? What's landing for people? What's not landing for people? Where's the change fatigue? Do we have a heat map that's showing us this audience is getting information at too high a level and they're straining under the weight of it? So, in summary, we're trying to basically handle the end-to-end process that would support the transformation office in doing a lot of the things that we're talking about. And as a shout out to all the folks on this call, a lot of times the questions, the comments, the suggestions that you're making, I'm really glad to be part of the connective tissue that's linking your needs up to these solutions because now we're at the place where we can actually start to build real capabilities to kind of manage the last mile of change while building in the visibility real time to be able to know how to measure and manage and course correct it. So if you're curious about it, definitely please reach out for a demo. We'd love to show you kind of what we're doing here. And then, as Julie's mentioned, we've actually published a number of those use cases online as well as a number of white papers. So there's some resources at the website. Thank you for that question.
Alrighty, so we have another question of when you were talking about cross-functional rotations into the office.
Mhm.
So Christy is asking, how have you seen that cross-functional rotation work in reality? The organization they come from will look very different to the one they are looking to return to, and roles for the high potential leaders might not be open for them to roll into.
I was happy to have this experience myself when I was at Intuit, and got into a situation where we basically had an innovation office, and the opportunity was for young senior leaders to be able to go and help stand up a new business or initiative. And then, in the process of, in my case, building or buying a new capability, at the end of that, then potentially moving into a leadership role in that new business or that new capability. So I've seen this work in a lot of companies. GE is famous for doing this. Intuit is another example. But if you've got opportunities to take sort of top senior leaders that are sort of young and up and coming, and then make them part of the change program, but then potentially be investing in their next role in the process, that's a super win-win for the organization because now they're going to come in and potentially lead that new program, lead that new business unit, be a senior leader in that new organization that you've stood up, and do it with the credibility and the depth of knowledge that came from actually being part of the creation of it. So love that question. I will continue to look for other really good examples of it because I think it's a best practice that a lot of organizations don't invest in. And if you are seeking to build this into your culture as well as retain your best employees, it's a super win-win. So with that, I think we're going to wrap today. I am delighted to have these conversations with you. I look forward to seeing you next week. Please do join us because we've got an opportunity to stop listening to me and listen to some people that have been there and done that, and tell their differing stories, and give you an opportunity to chat with them and ask them your questions or your comments. So thank you again. I'm so glad that all of you are in the process of making change in the world, and I look forward to seeing you next week.